Hello and welcome back. Today we will technically be covering Words of Mormon, but more specifically we'll be talking about how the Book of Mormon was put together. When Oliver Cowdery was preparing the Book of Mormon manuscript for the printer, he merged the small plates of Nephi with the rest of the Book of Mormon. And the order of the books in the Book of Mormon is not the same as the order in which they were translated. There were a lot of other details that I didn't know about, and honestly I think you'll find them pretty fascinating. But first, let's answer the trivia question from last time. What was the name of the person who wrote the least in the small plates? What was his name? The answer is Chemish. He only wrote a single verse, Omni 1 verse 9. And now I, Chemish, write what few things I write in the same book with my brother. For behold, I saw the last which he wrote, that he wrote it with his own hand, and he wrote it in the day that he delivered it unto me. And after this manner we keep our records, for it is according to the commandments of our fathers. And I make an end. If you've got ideas for trivia questions, I'd love to see them. Send them to me at bomjourney@gmail.com, and maybe I'll be able to use one of them in a future episode. All right, now diving into our main topic. I was reviewing 1 Nephi chapter 19, where Nephi was commanded to make two sets of plates. One for the wars and historical events, and the other for plain and precious prophecies and aspects of the ministry. And that got me investigating what happened when Martin Harris lost the first 116 pages that were translated. There were a lot of details that I didn't know about, and I've included links to my sources in the show notes if you want to check them out. If you're not familiar with the story of the lost pages, let me give a quick recap. After Joseph Smith retrieved the plates from where they were buried in the hill Cumorah, he was commanded to translate and publish them. I was tempted to say the golden plates, but that's misleading because although they were a golden color, they were not actually made of gold, but that topic will have to wait for another episode. Publishing a book was an expensive endeavor, and Joseph had no money. It was also a very labor-intensive process requiring all of Joseph's time and effort. His wife was expecting, and he needed to provide food and keep a roof over their head. Any aspiring authors out there will be familiar with the struggle. How do you make ends meet while you write your book? Although in Joseph's case, since he was translating, the process went a lot quicker. But anyway, Joseph needed a financial backer to pay the bills while he was translating. And one of these financial contributors was a well-to-do farmer named Martin Harris. He believed that he was doing the Lord's work by providing Joseph with financial support while he translated the plates. Martin Harris's wife, on the other hand, felt differently. She was convinced that Joseph was a fraud who had conned her husband into literally giving away the farm. She asked her husband if, before they gave Joseph any more money, if she could see what he was working on. So Martin asked Joseph if he could show his wife the translated manuscript. Joseph asked God, and God told Joseph no. So Joseph told Martin no, and Martin told his wife no, and Martin's wife was upset. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. And I'll be honest, if I were in her same situation, I probably would have felt the same way. She kept after Martin about it. He asked Joseph again, and the answer was no again. Martin asked Joseph a third time, and it's hard for me to blame Joseph either. I probably would have felt the same way he did. Look, God, Martin's helping us out by funding this project, and we're destroying his marriage. Can we at least let him show his wife what we're working on so she'll know he's not crazy? Can we show her that there's an actual book in the works? So Joseph asked God a third time, and God said, essentially, you know that my answer is no, but you can do whatever you want. So Joseph gave the 116 pages to Martin so he could show them to his wife, and they were never seen again. That much I already knew, and you probably knew as well. Here's what I didn't know. Martin's losing the 116 pages was a big deal, and it created an editing nightmare for Oliver Cowdery. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But first, it may help to understand the paper or papers on which the Book of Mormon's translation was recorded. I had always pictured the 116 pages as a stack of, if we do the math, 58 sheets of paper. But Joseph couldn't simply walk down to an Office Depot and buy a ream of paper. Instead, he made pages by taking a large sheet of paper and folding it lengthwise. So one sheet of paper folded in half turned into 4 pages. The front, the back, and the front and the back. And then when that one was finished, they would take several such papers and bind them together with the string. And they would call these groupings. Essentially, they were mini books. And the way we know this is from what remains of the original manuscript. Royal Skousen is the name of a professor who spent the last few decades examining the original manuscript, learning what he can from it. He thinks that the original 116 pages probably consisted of 5 of these groupings or 5 of these mini books. 4 of these mini books, he theorizes, had 6 sheets tied together. So 6 times 4 makes 24 pages. And 4 of those groupings, 4 times 24 is 96. And then you throw in a 5th grouping with 5 sheets. 5 times 4 is 20 plus 96, and you end up with 116 pages. So when Joseph gave the translation to Martin, he gave him several groupings of pages bound with string. But they had another set of pages that they were still working on that they hadn't finished yet. So they didn't give him those. And that will become relevant a little bit later. When Martin came back to Joseph empty-handed, and Joseph learned that the 116 pages had disappeared, he was devastated and he freaked out. Moroni apparently came and picked up the plates, and God told him that he was done translating. Then Joseph's wife had their first baby, named Alvin. Baby Alvin died, and Emma almost died as well. So this was not a good time for Joseph. Eventually, though, months later, God decided that Joseph had learned his lesson, and he allowed him to resume translating. And Moroni gave him back the Urim and Thummim and gave the plates back, and he was able to resume translating. Most of the manuscript that had been lost had been called the Book of Lehi, and it was Mormon's summary of what had happened during the first 500 years since Lehi left Jerusalem. It covered from the beginning of Lehi's journey down until the reign of King Benjamin. When Joseph resumed translation, he didn't attempt to retranslate what had been lost, but he continued translating right from where they had left off in the Book of Mosiah. They still had some pages from the original translation effort, and they just kept moving forward through the book. They didn't come back and translate Nephi's small plates until much later. This notion that the first book in our Book of Mormon that was translated was the Book of Mosiah is known as the Mosiah Priority. And if you want to go to Wikipedia, they have a pretty good article talking about the Mosiah Priority. So how do we know the order in which things were translated? Well, we don't know with 100% certainty, but the scribe's handwriting in the surviving portions of the original manuscript, and only it's 20 or 30% remains, but the surviving portions of the manuscript let us know who the translator was for different parts of the book. And the handwriting of the scribes in 1 Nephi through Words of Mormon are the people who were involved toward the very end of the translating process. Here's another interesting factoid. After he finished translating the large plates, Joseph applied for a copyright on the Book of Mormon. And then, after applying for the copyright, he went back and translated the small plates. When he applied for a copyright on June 11, 1829, he included the title page written by Moroni, which Joseph said was at the very end of Moroni's record. It was the last sheet of the large plates. In fact, when Joseph applied for his copyright, he used the wording for Moroni's title page in his copyright application. And you can find his original copyright application online. And in the description it says, and picture someone in 1820 reading this, the Book of Mormon, an account written by the hand of Mormon upon plates taken from the plates of Nephi. Wherefore it is an abridgment of the record of the people of Nephi and also of the Lamanites, written to the Lamanites, which are a remnant of the house of Israel, and also to the Jew and Gentile, written by way of commandment, and also by the spirit of prophecy and of revelation, written and sealed and hid up unto the Lord, that they might not be destroyed, to come forth by the gift and power of God unto the interpretation thereof, sealed up by the hand of Moroni, and hid up unto the Lord, to come forth in due time by the way of Gentile, the interpretation thereof by the gift of God, and so on. Reporters for New England newspapers discovered Joseph's copyright application, and they started writing articles mocking Joseph in his Golden Bible translation with its crazy writing style and its bizarre names like Nephi and Moroni and Lamanites and so on. And while Joseph was being pilloried by New England newspapers, he went back and translated the small plates of Nephi. Eventually, Oliver Cowdery was responsible for making what is now referred to as the printer's manuscript, or the document that the printer would use to create the book. So Oliver had to figure out how to arrange the book in a way that would make sense. He knew that the small plates of Nephi came first chronologically, so he moved them up to the front of the book. God gave instructions on this in Doctrine and Covenants 10. He explained to Joseph that he had anticipated the pages being lost and he had prepared a workaround. Although the book of Lehi, which had been translated, had been lost, Lehi's son Nephi had written a second record that covered roughly the same time period, although Nephi's record dealt more with spiritual matters and Lehi's had included political stuff and history and whatnot. Nephi's record, or the small plates, is what we've been discussing in all the videos up until this point. Then, in D&C 10, God gave Joseph the following instruction. Verse 41, "Therefore you shall translate the engravings, which are on the plates of Nephi, down even till you come to the reign of King Benjamin, or until you come to that which you have translated, which you have retained." So as mentioned earlier, Martin Harris didn't walk off with everything that had been translated. Joseph had retained the last few pages that they were working on. So Joseph was supposed to translate the small plates of Nephi down to the point where he reached the translation which had been retained. And these retained pages are the pages that were still a work in progress when Martin Harris took the other groupings to show his wife. But there was a problem. The 116 pages hadn't ended with a clean break. The first page of the retained manuscript began with several stranded verses and then the chapter heading Mosiah 3, which means that the original Mosiah 1 was missing altogether, and so was most of Mosiah chapter 2. So Oliver needed to find a way to combine everything without losing any of the translation, but also without giving readers whiplash. So Oliver took the stranded verses from the original Mosiah 2 and put them at the end of Words of Mormon, and then he took Mosiah chapter 3 and relabeled that Mosiah 1. And that is why the Book of Mosiah is the only book in the Book of Mormon that does not begin with a summary by Mormon or with an introductory paragraph by the author, as all the other books do, but instead it launches right into the content, because we're not really reading Mosiah 1, we're reading Mosiah 3. Can we tell where Oliver sewed the two documents together? Well, it appears that the stitch point occurred between verses 11 and 12 in Words of Mormon. The last paragraph in Words of Mormon originally was this: "And they were handed down from King Benjamin from generation to generation until they have fallen into my hands. And I, Mormon, pray to God that they may be preserved from this time henceforth, and I know that they will be preserved. For there are great things written upon them, out of which my people and their brethren shall be judged at the great and last day, according to the word of God which is written." And that was the end of Words of Mormon. And then Oliver added in those last straggling verses of the original Mosiah 2, beginning with verse 12. "And now concerning this King Benjamin, he had somewhat of contentions among his own people." And with that verse, we launch into the retained part of the translation, or the translation that Joseph hung on to when Martin Harris took the rest to show his wife. Oliver did a good job. In fact, if someone didn't point it out to you, you probably wouldn't even notice that it had been edited together. And that's all I have, and I hope you found that as interesting as I did. Although it doesn't change the contents of the Book of Mormon at all, I'll admit I was fascinated to learn the nuts and bolts of how the Book of Mormon came together. And that's all I have for today. Next time we'll launch into the Book of Mosiah, and that leads to today's trivia question. The answer is easy to find, but I'll be surprised if you know it offhand. You're welcome to look it up, by the way. Mosiah was King Benjamin's son. But Mosiah also had two brothers. What were their names? What were the names of Mosiah's two brothers? If you know the answer, leave it in the comments. If you'd like to send me a trivia question to use in some future episode, email it to me at bomjourney@gmail.com. And we will see you next time.